Have you ever wondered what might happen if the most overlooked continent on Earth suddenly became the global leader in innovation? What if I told you that this shift isn't a distant future fantasy, but a present-day reality unfolding in 2025? And what if I told you that mainstream media is barely whispering a word about it? You would probably raise an eyebrow, maybe even dismiss it as hopeful exaggeration. But stay with me, because what you're about to discover will flip everything you thought you knew about innovation and who leads it. 4 groundbreaking African inventions have emerged within the past year, and each one challenges the global narrative about who creates the future. We're not talking about small improvements on existing technologies. We're talking about world firsts. We're talking about breakthroughs Western experts declared impossible. We're talking about ideas born from necessity, crafted in scarcity, and driven by purpose. Let's rewind the narrative that has been fed to the world for decades. Africa is poor. Africa needs help. Africa is behind. How many times have you heard this? These beliefs are not just outdated. They are engineered misconceptions. They are part of a long, deliberate effort to sideline a continent that has always been rich in ingenuity. Long before Europe had its Renaissance, Africa had universities exchanging advanced mathematical theories. Long before the stethoscope or MRI machine, Africa had surgical procedures and anatomical knowledge that baffled colonial invaders. The world's first heart transplant wasn't performed in Europe or the United States. It was performed in South Africa by Dr. Christian Barnard. And the oldest evidence of mathematical thought wasn't found in Paris or New York. It was found in the Congo Basin, a 20,000-year-old bone carved with deliberate numeric patterns. Not 200 years. Not 2,000 years. 20,000 years ago. Mathematics, astronomy, engineering, all deeply rooted in African soil long before colonial interference. But colonization did more than steal resources. It disrupted a lineage of innovation. It interrupted the arc of African genius. And for nearly 500 years, others have been telling Africa's story. Today, that changes. Because today, Africa is telling its own story. And that story begins with a truth few want to hear. Africa doesn't need to catch up. Africa is leading in ways the rest of the world has yet to imagine. Let's start with an innovation that speaks directly to the human condition. The loss of a limb. In most countries, losing an arm or leg is financially devastating. Prosthetic limbs can cost more than a year's salary. And for millions of people in the developing world, they're simply unattainable. But in Kikuyu, Kenya, 2 local inventors refused to accept that reality. Their names are David Gate and Moses Kona. They didn't wait for international aid. They didn't beg for foreign investment. They got to work. In a humble local workshop filled with salvaged electronics and scrap metal, they created something that would make Silicon Valley engineers take a second look. An AI-powered prosthetic arm that responds to brain signals. A mind-controlled limb built not in a multi-million-dollar lab, but in a dusty garage. Let that sink in. While companies like Neuralink spend billions to develop brain-computer interfaces, 2 self-taught Kenyan engineers built one from discarded radios and old circuit boards. Their prototype worked. Not just in theory, but in practice. The first time an amputee tried their device, he thought about moving his fingers. And the robotic arm responded. It moved. The man's expression said it all, a mix of disbelief, joy, and wonder. In the West, such prosthetics cost upwards of $50,000. For many Kenyans, that might as well be $50 million. But Gate and Kona had a different mission. To make life-changing tech affordable. To build not for the market, but for the people. And what happens when billions of people who've been priced out of technology suddenly gain access to it? What happens when innovation is driven by purpose, not profit? Now imagine scaling that impact across a continent. That's just the first story. The second comes from South Africa. from the front lines of one of the deadliest pandemics in human history. For over 40 years, HIV has ravaged communities, especially in sub-Saharan Africa. Trillions have been spent, yet a cure has remained elusive. Until now. In Durban, a city with one of the highest HIV infection rates in the world, something extraordinary happened. Professor Thumbine Dung Yu and his team launched an African-led HIV cure trial. Not a Western initiative. Not big pharma. Local scientists. African researchers. Leading the way. Their approach defied traditional treatment methods. Instead of focusing solely on medication to suppress the virus, they trained the immune system to fight it. They combined early detection with powerful immune-boosting therapies. Their goal was ambitious: eliminate or neutralize traces of HIV so the body can control it on its own. No lifelong drugs. No daily pills. And the results were staggering. 20% of participants showed no detectable virus after 18 months, without medication. Let that sink in. 1 in 5, potentially cured. For a continent home to over 20 million people living with HIV, this is more than medical news. It's liberation. It's healing led by those who have carried the burden longest. And if the cure for AIDS comes not from Switzerland or California, but from Durban, what does that say about who gets to lead global medicine? While Kenya and South Africa break ground in health and human enhancement, the Republic of Congo is electrifying the world, literally. Imagine a world where you generate electricity from your garden. No solar panels. No wind turbines. No fossil fuels. Just plants. It sounds like sci-fi, but it's happening. In Congo, an innovator named Vital Vigam developed the world's first scalable plant battery. A system that extracts usable electrical current directly from plant roots. Here's how it works. Specialized electrodes are inserted into the root systems of living plants. These electrodes capture the natural voltage generated during biological processes. The energy is then converted and stored. Enough to power lights, televisions, and small appliances for up to 12 hours. In a pilot project, 3 households were connected to 3 different plants: citrus trees, eucalyptus, and avocados. The results: avocados produced the most electricity, eucalyptus the least. That's right. Avocados can power your home. They're not just food. They're energy. This discovery didn't come from an Ivy League research center. It came from the Congo Basin, a region already home to the earliest evidence of mathematical reasoning, and also home to $24 trillion worth of mineral resources. But here's the twist. No one needs to mine anything for this innovation. It's green. It's renewable. It's accessible. No massive power stations. No grid required. Just living plants and a brilliant idea. Imagine what this means for the 600 million Africans living without reliable electricity. Liberation again. From power shortages. From dependency. From environmental destruction. And we're still not done. Because in Zimbabwe, something even more disruptive is happening. Imagine a car that never needs gas. Never plugs in. Never runs out of battery. It sounds impossible, but Maxwell Chikambutso says otherwise. He's a self-taught inventor who's done the unthinkable. Built vehicles that power themselves. By converting ambient radio frequencies into energy. No fuel. No charging. No emissions. Cars. Motorcycles. Generators. All running independently. When Chikambutso revealed his technology, the world laughed. Physicists called it pseudoscience. Energy companies called it a hoax. Until they saw it. Running. And running. And running. No stops. No wires. No tricks. Even Zimbabwe's president publicly endorsed the technology. He recognized the potential not just for Zimbabwe, but for the world. But that's where things got dark. During a trip to the United States, Chikambutso allegedly survived a poisoning attempt. The motive remains unclear, but the message was chilling. Disruptive innovation is dangerous, not because it doesn't work, but because it does. Chikambutso's tech isn't just for cars. It can power homes, offices, hospitals. Up to 15 kilowatts, enough for an entire household. What happens when people no longer need utility companies? When power becomes decentralized? When anyone can generate their own electricity? It's not just innovation. It's revolution. And revolutions scare those in power, because they threaten the existing order. They shift control from corporations to communities, from boardrooms to backyards. These 4 African inventions are more than breakthroughs. They are paradigm shifts. They're not about catching up to the West. They're about redefining progress. And we've only just begun. These breakthroughs are not accidents. They are not anomalies. They are not random events occurring in isolation. They are part of a much bigger shift. A shift in thinking. A shift in ownership. A shift in narrative. Africa is not borrowing ideas. Africa is not licensing innovation. Africa is not imitating. Africa is creating. From scratch. With limited funding. With recycled components. With an urgent sense of purpose. And this is what makes these inventions so powerful. They are solutions designed for necessity, not luxury. They are technologies born from constraints, not abundance. They are built to solve real-world problems, not hypothetical ones. And they are doing so with elegance, efficiency, and empathy. When innovation is driven by survival, the results are often breathtaking. When it's driven by community, it becomes transformative. Let's take a step back and look at what connects these 4 inventions. They all meet essential human needs. They are not about profit margins. They are about dignity. They are about access. They are about freedom. Gate and Kona's mind-controlled prosthetic gives mobility to the forgotten. It gives agency back to the amputee. It tells a child who lost a limb in an accident that their life isn't over. It tells a farmer who stepped on a landmine that they can work again. It's not just a robotic arm. It's a chance to live. Thumbine Dung US HIV research offers something medicine rarely provides: hope. Real, measurable hope. Not a lifetime subscription to pills, but a path to freedom. Freedom from the stigma. Freedom from the burden. Freedom from dependence on multinational pharmaceutical giants. Vital Vigum's plant battery doesn't just produce electricity. It produces self-sufficiency. It gives light to a village without building a grid. It gives power to a clinic miles from the nearest transformer. It gives students the ability to study after sunset. It transforms trees into tools. Maxwell Chikambutso's self-powering vehicles do more than drive. They rewrite the rules of energy. They tell oil companies that their monopoly is over. They tell utility firms that the future is wireless. They tell the world that energy doesn't have to be dirty, expensive, or scarce. And taken together, these 4 inventions form a single, undeniable truth. Africa is no longer waiting for permission. It is no longer asking for validation. It is building the future on its own terms. And that's threatening to those who have built empires on control. Let's be honest about what's really at stake. The global prosthetics market is worth over $20 billion. A market that profits by keeping prices high. A market that doesn't benefit from affordable, open-source alternatives. Kenya's innovation disrupts that. The global HIV drug market is worth nearly $40 billion a year. A massive industry fueled by recurring treatment. Not cures. Not independence. South Africa's approach threatens that model. The global energy infrastructure is a multi-trillion-dollar ecosystem, built around centralization, around control, around carbon. Congo's and Zimbabwe's innovations shatter that ecosystem. They don't just suggest a new direction. They render the old model obsolete. So ask yourself, why aren't these stories leading the news? Why aren't these inventors on magazine covers? Why aren't governments rushing to scale these solutions globally? Because these ideas don't just solve problems. They challenge power. They make people question who benefits from the status quo. They reveal how much of the world's suffering is sustained by design, not accident. They prove that some problems persist not because they are unsolvable, but because their solutions aren't profitable enough for those in charge. Let's sit with that for a moment. What happens when life-saving ideas come from places that have been ignored? What happens when the narrative shifts from helping Africa to learning from Africa? What happens when those who were once called consumers become creators? That's what 2025 is about. A turning point. A narrative collapse. A new chapter. Because African innovation is not just catching up. It's setting the pace. And the world is being forced to take notice. Not because of charity. Not because of guilt. But because the solutions are undeniable, unstoppable, and urgently needed. Let's talk about scale. Let's talk about what happens when these technologies move beyond their local beginnings. When mind-controlled prosthetics go into mass production. When plant batteries power rural schools across the continent. When HIV therapy protocols are shared from village clinics to national hospitals. When self-powering vehicles hit markets from Accra to Addis Ababa. That's not just impact. That's transformation. That's a new global supply chain, made in Africa, by Africa, for the world. And for the first time, Africa has the tools to make this happen. Digital connectivity, mobile banking, cross-border e-commerce, a young population hungry to build, a diaspora eager to invest, and a growing regional infrastructure driven by the African Continental Free Trade Area. That means goods can move faster, ideas can travel farther, companies can scale quicker. This isn't just potential. It's already happening. Every week, new startups emerge from Lagos, Nairobi, Kigali, Johannesburg. Every month, more African universities publish world-class research. Every quarter, more investment flows into African innovation. This isn't a blip. It's a surge. And it's accelerating. But with that acceleration comes resistance. Because disruption is rarely welcomed by those it displaces. We must talk about the danger. Not to Africa, but to the people who benefit from Africa's supposed weakness. To the industries that rely on it. To the governments that exploit it. To the media that misrepresents it. There is a reason these stories are hard to find. There is a reason you've never heard of David Gate or Moses Kona, or Professor Thumbai Ndungyu, or Vital Vigam, or Maxwell Chikambutso. It's not because their ideas don't matter. It's because they matter too much. Because they threaten the narrative. And the narrative is valuable. Africa is supposed to be poor, so aid can continue. Africa is supposed to be dependent, so deals can be one-sided. Africa is supposed to be behind, so extraction can be justified. But what happens when that lie breaks? What happens when the world wakes up to the truth? That Africa has always been a source of genius. That Africa has always innovated. That Africa has always had the answers. They were just buried, silenced, ignored. But not anymore. In 2025, the silence is broken. The invention is louder than the suppression. And the world can no longer look away. Because when a limb moves by thought in Kenya, it's not just movement, it's revolution. Because when a virus disappears in South Africa, it's not just science, it's liberation. Because when a tree powers a home in Congo, it's not just energy, it's sovereignty. Because when a car runs forever in Zimbabwe, it's not just transport, it's independence.